Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that the right book at the right time can change lives, and that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do here on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature: picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels for readers of all ages. In each episode, we'll talk with children's literature authors and discuss their books, their hopes, their dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. Whether you're an adult reading to their inner child or connecting the young readers in your life with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your Kid Lit Loving host, inviting you back for another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with R.L. Toalson. R.L. writes books for readers of all ages, kids, teens, and adults. Most of her stories examine the intersection of neurodivergence and mental illness and feature characters who challenge societal norms and shatter misconceptions, with titles like Love, Civvy, Maybe Something Magnificent, Colors of the Rain, The Woods, and more. She's here today to talk about her newest release, My Brother Oliver. This is a beautiful and truly unforgettable novel in verse about a boy struggling with guilt as his family reels from the fallout of his older brother's extreme depression and how he tries to hold on to hope. It is truly stamped on my reading heart forever, and I cannot wait to talk about it with her. So we are going to get right to the episode. Rachel, welcome to Kidlit Love. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here too, and I'm very excited about our conversation.
When I say stamped on my reading heart, I truly mean stamped on my reading heart. I mean, I hugged it. I mean, it's been
Oh,
close by. It is filled with sticky notes, maybe a couple of dried tears as we move through the story. And I can't wait to really dive into your newest book, but I do want to start with you, of course. And I would love for you to tell us just a bit about your background and the journey you've taken to through children's literature to the book we're about to talk about today.
well, I my first career was a journalist. So I worked as a journalist for about 10 years, covered news and features. I was always really enamored with people. So I loved doing stories about people. But my real dream was to be a novelist. And I think I found my way into kids literature because in my own life, I feel like the ages between probably 10 and like 18 were the hardest years of my life. And so a lot of times I'm reconnecting with those difficult places and trying to write a better story forward, if that makes sense. So Kidlit has my love because it's so hopeful and it's just something that I feel like really makes an impact on kids, not only like building readers, but also showing them how to be in the world, how to love, how to forgive, how to be themselves, in all of their remarkable ways. So I think that's the reason, like, even though I write for adults, I'm always working on a middle grade project, sometimes a YA project, but like middle grade is, that's my love.
Yeah.
So,
There is something so special and magical and also horrible and hard about that 10 to 18
yes,
time
uh-huh.
frame that you said, that having a book, right, which when you read it does not feel like a fictional book. It feels like the characters are real and they are
Yeah.
there for you and you're being seen on the page and you're also seeing on the page. There is just something about that time in our reading life. I know when I think back to my middle grade years, I remember those books. I
Yeah,
remember
oh, for
them
sure.
like they were yesterday. And so I
Yeah.
just feel like this particular area of children's literature is so important Like,
It
like
really
you
is.
said, not just for enjoyment, but for the humans that we
Yes.
are becoming.
For yeah, for making making good humans is kind of what I feel. It's not that we're being didactic or anything like that, but like I really feel like stories can save lives because we see ourselves in them and we see struggles that we're going through, and we can not just learn how to navigate those struggles, but also know that like we're not the first ones to go through that struggle. And that to me is one of the biggest um, hopeful things, I think, because when we're going through something, we can feel terribly alone.
Yes.
And for kids, it's even worse because they don't want to talk about those things. And stories can be that conversation for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. And I want to point out too, even before we get into the nitty-gritty of the book, because I open with the episode, you write books for kids and teens and adults, but this one is for all of them.
Yes.
A middle
Yeah.
grade reader will find themselves here. A YA reader will find themselves here. An adult is going to meet their inner child or their child or someone
Yeah.
they care about here. This is a book truly that not only is for everyone, but I think has such potential to connect all of them together, all of us together, whether we are doing it physically and actually talking to each other about what's happening in the book, about what might be happening in our own lives, or just metaphysically, right? That we have
Yeah.
all read it and we are all connected in this way, even though we may not know it. There was such a comfort to
Yeah.
me in the midst of some of the hard things in the story. There was such a deep comfort, even not knowing, who I was talking to, knowing these characters aren't real, and not even speaking to you yet, but
Yeah.
feeling this connection of, oh, okay, these could be my people. These, I
Yeah.
I get this. I feel this.
Oh, I
This,
love that. I love
yeah.
that you say all of that because that's exactly that's one of my hopes for this book is that it will connect, that parents will read it with their kids, that teachers will read it with their students, and, we have conversations about important things.
Yes. Okay,
So,
that's the segue to the book, right? Important things. Let's talk about the things. I would love for you to introduce listeners to the book, My Brother Oliver, this, gosh, beautiful, lyrical, emotional novel in verse. Tell us about the book and the inspiration, the personal inspiration, as readers will learn if they get to the very end of the book, that has sparked it.
okay. Well, My Brother Oliver is about a boy named Brooks who he has an older brother named Oliver who struggles with emotional dysregulation. And what that means is Oliver sometimes flies off the handle, sometimes has these emotional outbursts that are really hard on his family. And so Brooks is kind of dealing with that and also trying to figure out how can I make him just be a normal brother and not be so stressful on my parents. And then Oliver, his brother, has a mental health crisis. And so Brooks, he's dealing with some guilt and without giving like everything away, he's
It's
dealing with some
hard, I
guilt
know.
about how things panned out, what happened. His brother Oliver is now in a psychiatric hospital. And so it's a story not only about what happens with all of that, but I feel like at its heart, it's really a love story between two brothers who are trying to navigate their way into a relationship with each other, into what it looks like to be brothers when you're different. I never say it in the book because I'm not huge on labels, but Oliver is neurodivergent. And a lot of times, there are other things that come along with being neurodivergent. And um, so Brooks is kind of trying to figure out like how do I have a relationship with this neurodivergent brother when he's not like what you see on TV, the relationships between brothers and things like that. So the inspiration behind the story, I have a neurodivergent son who did the same thing that Oliver in the story does. He had a mental health crisis. He spent some time, he's okay with me sharing all this, by the way. He spent some time in a psychiatric institution, and it was very, very, very hard for our family, and particularly the next in line. I have six children, but the next in line son was very impacted by his brother going to a psychiatric hospital. And so for a long time, it took me a really long time to write this story because it happened the night before his 13th birthday. He's now 19. And so if you do the math on that, that's a long time to just, sit with those memories. But I felt like I needed to write about it because um, there are just some things that happen in the book that can facilitate conversation around what mental health looks like, what bullying looks like, because it's not always loud and it's not always fists. Because there's a lot of bullying that contributed to not only Oliver's mental crisis, but my son's mental crisis. Not that doesn't blame bullying for everything, but it is a factor in like how well we can handle those kinds of situations. And then like I think what was unique about this one is that, I was the parent in the situation. A lot of times when I'm writing stories for young people, I'm writing it from the kid, like I was the kid in the situation. But in this one, I was the parent. But I also, like Brooks, grew up with someone in my life who struggled with emotional dysregulation and who had suicidal ideation. And so I was very familiar with like the helplessness that comes from those situations and just feeling like you had to, I mean, my entire growing up years, I felt like I had to be perfect because my mom, who was a single mom, couldn't handle anything more, than what a sibling did. So I felt like I was kind of writing from both the parent and the child perspective, but also trying to really get into my son's heads about, where they were in those things too.
You did get in their heads. You got in all of their heads. I felt like I knew all of them. I knew Brooks, I knew Oliver, I knew the parents, I knew Jill. Uh, I knew
Yeah,
all of them. And I feel, especially because the novel in verse format is just so piercing
yeah,
emotionally that you cannot help but be there. And I think the other thing that impacted me so much, and I'd love to hear you talk about kind of your rationale behind these two moves. One is the beautiful verse, but the other is the format, like this back and forth, the then and now, a couple days before, a couple, weeks before.
yeah,
You get the what's happening now, and then you get the context, and then you move a little bit further, and then you get more context, and you're just so wrapped up into
yeah,
this family, into this story, and those two things just propel the reader
yeah,
right into the pages.
yeah.
And I love to hear you talk about those choices that you made
Okay.
around that.
Yeah, so with verse novels, my very first published novel is a verse novel. And I think I tend to reach for verse whenever it's a very hard story to tell. So for this one particularly, a lot of times when I've gone through trauma or I'm remembering those things, I'm a poet. And so that's my first language. So this one just kind of came out of me as poetry. And I feel like poetry, you don't you don't have to say everything in poetry. You can leave things to the interpretation of readers. And for hard stories like this one, I feel like that's probably the best choice to make, because I didn't have to go into details. I didn't have to focus on something for a really long time, but I could just write about it in poetry, and it kind of, it's a very quick and I hope lyrical way of kind of telling what is happening. As far as like the going back and forth, I think I what I really wanted to do was provide context for where Oliver and Brooks were in the present day. A lot of times as writers, we're told like you shouldn't do flashbacks and nobody wants to read flashbacks, but I felt like they were really important for this one so that kids could see what leads up to a person having a situation like that, you know? And there were multiple factors. I mean, he's getting bullied, he's struggling with grades. There are just, there are pressures upon pressures. And sometimes like a mind just isn't ready to handle those things. And I think in that age group as well, like Oliver is in seventh grade, and it's right before his 13th birthday. And puberty, like it
Yeah.
messes everything up.
Yeah.
And emotions, we always tell our kids, emotions, they're like on steroids. Like everything that you feel is so much bigger than what it would be otherwise, not to minimize those things, but just to like provide context to like when you feel that way, it's your brain just being dumb.
Yeah.
Not dumb, but it's just your brain working overtime because your body's being all weird and stuff, um so I think both of those choices, it feels like they happened very organically for me, just because it like the flashback, present day flashback, it felt like it provided a sense of, like you said, context for the things that were happening.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. It wasn't easy to do, but I don't know, it was just an organic choice when I started telling the story. So
Well, it was perfect because I don't think it would have had the same emotional impact, the same investment, had it just been a build from, X day to something big that happens at the end. It was this back and forth. And because of the topic you're talking about of mental health, of bullying, of all sorts of dynamics just swirling around, those are not neat and narrow and linear. Those
right,
are
exactly.
swirled
Yeah,
and
yeah,
spiraled and
yeah,
complex. And so
yeah,
I think that back and forth nature of it was also why like our hearts were so invested because we were going back and forth
yeah.
with the reader. And even though primarily from Brooke's perspective, you could feel what Oliver was feeling, what mom was feeling, what dad was
Oh
feeling, what
yeah,
the teachers were feeling. You could
yeah,
feel it from that. And I just feel like those two choices, it wasn't reading a book.
yeah,
It was truly an experience there with those characters. And just from the
totally.
first couple of pages, like listeners are just listening to me talk about it, but once they open up and they get those first couple of really expansive, poems on the page, you're just in it.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
truly
I think
beautiful.
I think too with the, present day and then switching to flashback, it also the present day is so emotional. And so it allowed kind of a pause button to where you like when you go
Yeah.
to the flashback, it's more like you're getting context, but you're not feeling all of those emotions, so it's almost like a little break before you move back into, oh my gosh, this is so emotional kind
Yeah.
of thing. So
So is that
yeah.
kind of like a pause button for you as well? I imagine this was an emotional roller coaster.
Oh yeah, probably. I mean, I read it to my like whenever I get the arcs, I read always read them aloud to my kids, and we read this one aloud, and they're still like every time I read these certain points, I can't get through them. Like my kids already know this. They're like, "Mom's gonna cry somewhere in this." But there were still like so many places where I just because it does like it speaks to our inner child, but it's also speaking to children, something that I believe fully. So
Yeah. So in the book, we're talking a lot about things that probably sound difficult for the reader, like is the topic all, around this one event or what are the difficult things in there? But I really want to point out that there's lots of different layers and threads.
mhm.
Of course you know this, but listeners, there's certainly that thread of the sibling relationship, older brother, younger brother, and you have, oh my gosh, I believe I've lost maybe the page number. It's 380 something, I think, where it talks about the second born son to the first
Oh,
born son, and those relationships are there. You see the family relationships between mom and dad, between mom, dad, Oliver, between mom, dad, Oliver Brooks, but
Yeah.
also the things that go unsaid yet are seen, like the quiet ways the routines alter for some and not other, the quiet eggshells we might step on to protect the
Yeah.
family. There's all sorts of layers, not to mention the layer of bullying we already mentioned, and then just friendships and being a
Mhm.
middle grader,
Yeah.
is there as well. So I really want listeners to know this is a book for every reader of every age, as I mentioned. It is certainly a book if you or your family or someone you know has gone through something hard like this. But on the other side, it is also for you if you haven't, because it is just a human reality in the
Yeah.
book that makes you think about, appreciate your own, and perhaps look at things, look at the world, look at mental health, look at others with a little bit more empathy, a little
Hmm.
more complexity. Like you can't read this from cover to cover and leave the same person. You just can't.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really believe that. And I want listeners to know like there is something for every reader, no matter if you can relate to the discussion that we're having or not. Like
Yeah.
everybody is in there.
I appreciate that because I mean that's what authors always hope of their books. It's not just, the specific becomes universal, right? In some like magical way. And I think what I kind of told myself is that even if people haven't experienced something like that, they have experienced a loved one going through a hard time and feeling that helplessness that you sometimes feel
Yeah.
like you can't do anything about it. You can't help them. You don't know how. And certainly for kids in that middle grade group, there have been situations like that because on like our lives are hard and kids' lives are hard and they can be, they can see things that we don't want to think that they see, but they do. I mean, who among us would ever think that our 12-year-old the night before his 13th birthday would, you know, have a mental health crisis and make a list of reasons he doesn't belong in the world? So it's just a reality that we have. And I don't know, stories, I feel so strongly that stories can help us through those times. And regardless of whether we've experienced that specific situation, there are things that we take from it that we never forget?
Yeah, I won't forget this. I won't forget this book. My own personal connections to the book, as I've mentioned on the podcast before, my daughter, and have permission to say it as well, has struggled with an eating disorder in the past, has had all sorts of levels of therapy. And when I think back on that time, I was definitely guilty of always thinking about what things might seem like from her perspective, getting lost in my own perspective, and not nearly enough taking the perspective of perhaps the older and younger brother or the
Yes.
other people in the
Yeah.
home. And so as I read this book, I was revisiting that time and thinking, oh, that is what it must have looked like from the other
Yeah.
end, yet knowing that's not, the intention of what it was. And so I
Yeah.
think stories, as you mentioned, stories can save us. Stories can save lives. I think in a forward motion of, okay, I'm not alone. Okay, if this ever happens, okay, I'm going through this. This book can help. But also this backward motion of looking
Yeah.
back at a different time in our lives, in my life, if I'm just speaking from my own perspective, and still healing
Yeah.
it, even though I am
Definitely.
not in it anymore. So I kept thinking that as I was reading your book, like some readers, this is going to be a forward-thinking book that's going to help. And then there are others who are going to go deeper backwards,
Yeah.
and it's
Hmm.
going to help them in reverse as well.
Yeah. I had mentioned to a friend that I think one of the hard things about there are many hard things about writing this book, but one of them was that like I really wanted the parents to be perfect because I wanted to like, because it's based on something my husband and I experienced, I wanted it to be like, oh, we did everything we were supposed to do. But like, we had no idea what we were
Right.
doing. Brooks's parents have no idea what they're doing. And I think that speaks to something, even, for adult readers and for kid readers, that like parents aren't perfect and we
Right.
don't always know what to do. And we just try to do the best we can. And sometimes there comes a moment where we get to apologize for those things or those mistakes that we've made, or we get to, I know there's a moment in the book with Brooks and his mom, and he's kind of confessing to the feelings that he has.
Right here, it's sticky
Yeah,
noted.
yeah, that's one of the ones that always makes me cry every single time I read it.
Yes, that may have been where the pages were a little wet as well
Yeah,
on my copy.
awesome. Yeah, and that there comes a moment where we may get to do that with our
Yeah,
kids. And I don't know, I'm not in the perfect parent club and I never want to be, because I feel like there's some um I don't know, we're human and we show that we're human. And I think kids need to know that, in situations like that, it can be hard for parents to
yeah,
to know what to do and to, you know, do the right thing for the kid who's not in crisis.
yeah.
So,
There's no manual that you get handed when
oh,
when you get that
no,
baby. You
there's
just do the
not.
best you can.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So as you think of this book going out into the world, what is your hope for the book or for your hope for readers who get the book in their hands?
Well, I think there are a lot of different hopes. I really hope that it's something that parents and kids can experience together in like a read aloud kind of thing where they can facilitate conversation. And I'm actually working on like a parent guide right now for if they
Wonderful.
actually do that, and some conversation starters and things like that. um, I'm always in favor of like reading aloud and sharing those books with your kids because I feel like there's just a connection that can be made whenever we're
Yeah.
sharing books that we love with our kids, or even sharing hard things that we can, talk about and facilitate that conversation. Um, I really hope that kids who are like Brooks and like Oliver can see themselves in the story. I'm thinking also of neurodivergent kids who have a brain like Oliver's and who feel I am neurodivergent myself. I'm on the autism spectrum, and all of my life I felt so different. I felt like there was this like darkness that I had inside me that I had to hide from everybody. And it was a different time, like I wasn't even diagnosed until I was an adult. And I think sometimes like that was something that contributed to my own son's crisis, was that he constantly felt the difference between him and other people. And it was something that, certain people made worse because maybe they weren't quite as, comfortable with the difference. um, I'm being very vague there, but just the bullying in general, a lot of autistic people are bullied because they think differently and sometimes they move differently and talk differently. And so I'm hoping that it will also show those differences and educate about those differences and make kids a little more comfortable with them, and show like what words can do, because that the bullying isn't, I mean, some of it is physical, but a lot of it is, with words, and sometimes we don't even think about what our words do. And I'm really hoping that some who will read this book will be like, oh yeah, I should take care with what I say about other people because that probably hurt that person. So a lot of those kinds of things. And I don't know, I just hope it will like really facilitate conversation around mental illness, mental health, and neurodivergence, and show, I don't know, maybe a better future, like that we're all together, we're different, but we're all on the same team, and we should be like working for the good of everybody.
Yeah. Readers are going to feel that at the end. We didn't even talk about, some of the other, well, we can't talk about one of the things I would have loved to have talked to you about what happens at the end, but let's just say there's lots of arcs and full circle things. And yeah, this is the perfect book to leave readers just feeling different, feeling changed, feeling a bit more reflective, and definitely opening up a connection, whether they move on it or not, they're going to feel it at the end
Yeah.
of this book. Oh, I could just talk about this book with you for a really long time.
That
Oh,
means a lot. Yeah, I love that you loved it.
I did love it. I did love it. But I do want to ask if you're working on other things, or like, can you give us sneak peeks into perhaps what might be coming in the future after My Brother Oliver?
Yeah. Well, I have a young adult novel that's publishing in March of next year. And it basically takes on, so I grew up in a very low income family, and it takes on the stereotypes that we have about low income people. Like, I can't just write a book to write a book, I have to like examine these things. And so it's about a young woman who is graduating high school, but a school counselor approaches her and says, hey, I noticed that you have high SAT scores and you're like at the top of your class. Have you thought about college? And like she had never thought about that because her family doesn't have money. And it's basically like my high school journey of understanding that the world doesn't get to say who we get to be, but we get to say who we get to be. So it kind of tackles all that, all the stereotypical nonsense about about people in low income situations. They're lazy, they aren't smart, they aren't, good workers, whatever. So I'm excited about that one. It's called Dirty Windows Don't Open. And then I have a middle grade fantasy. It's not under contract or anything yet, but I'm hoping that it will find a home. The marketplace is a little bit difficult right now. You've probably seen all the stuff. So a lot of me and my other kidlit authors are just trying to figure out a way to like keep doing what we're doing. So it's a little bit of a challenge right now, but
Well, I was going to say the opposite and say, my goodness, six kids, all the books before, new books, more on the horizon. You must not
yeah.
sleep, or you're just very prolific, and it's admirable.
Well, thank you. I think writing is kind of how I take care of my mental health. So that's like, telling stories is, I don't know, it's magical to me and it's healing to me. So yeah. My kids know this too. Like when I haven't written for a while, like on their spring break and when they're off school and stuff, I'll hang out with them and stuff. And by the end of the week, they're like, Mom, you need to go to your room and write because I just get really grumpy and it's so great.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Now, where is the best place that we can find you online to keep up with the books coming out and whatever might be coming next?
Yeah, my website is racheltoalson.com. It's just first and last name.com. And then I have a Substack too. So it's, I guess, substack.com/Rachel Tolson. So I post a lot of extras there. Like what's coming up is I have a whole playlist for My Brother Oliver that people can like read it like a movie is what I call it. So all the chapters have songs that kind of coordinate to the mood of the
Oh, that's
story.
so exciting. Oh, I
Yeah.
can't wait to go take a peek at that. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll put links to your
Okay.
website, to Substack, to those things right in the show notes for listeners. And of course, links to My Brother Oliver as well. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for writing it, first of all. And then thank you for coming on to talk about it. It was such a treat to get the backstory and to be able to share with you how much it impacted me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me and for sharing that it impacted you too. A lot of times, writers are doing their thing and we never hear from readers. And it's exciting when we do. So
I'm glad. I'm so glad. And listeners, thank you, of course, for listening to another episode of Kidlit Love. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kidlit Love podcast. You'll find links to all of the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. You'll also find Kidlit Love on Substack. That's where you'll find posts for each episode, monthly Kidlit roundups, and an invitation to join my summer book club and go deeper into the world of children's literature. And if you loved this podcast and want more, You might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.